Hello, everybody. This is Will Swan from LW Robbins, and I hope that everyone is connected and can see their screens and hear what we're saying. And I think we have several people that have joined us already and a few to join us, but I think we'll go ahead and start anyway. Again, this is Will Swan welcoming you to our webinar, A Balanced Approach, Food Bank Fundraising in a Tough Economy. We've allowed an hour for this webinar with about 30 minutes of speaking time from us. This provides plenty of time for questions and discussion if you'd like. If we've answered all questions before the hour, then we'll stop early. Regardless, we'll run no longer than an hour. Today we'll talk about the metrics for a group of 10 food banks that we've been tracking for a number of years. These food banks represent different sizes, geography, and have been clients of ours for at least 5 years. The focus of the webinar is the most challenging fundraising time period in recent memory, the recession years of 2009 through 2012. We consider what we do with our food bank clients a balanced approach because we use strategies that are moderate and consistent, making sure each donor segment is performing at its best. We'll discuss how this starts with acquiring high-quality new donors and focuses on making sure that these new donors are effectively cultivated over time. This webinar will not focus that much on list, offer, timing, copy, package, etc. These strategies are really, they really do require a one-on-one conversation. Today we'll review the key metrics that we know make a program successful. Excuse me. Just a few housekeeping details if you could. Please mute your phone if you haven't already when you're not asking questions. There are about 50 people on the call and it could get a little noisy with unmuted phones. Thank you very much. When you do have questions, please either ask us, you can interrupt us or do anything you choose, or use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll answer as many questions as we can, and any that can't be answered now will be answered after the webinar by email. One more thing, please let us know just one more time to make sure that the slides are coming through and that everyone can hear us. Okay, why don't we get started? Today's presenters, first is me. First, I'd like to do a quick introduction, starting with myself. I've worked in direct response agency work for over 25 years, most of that time in fundraising. I've concentrated my work on food banks for the last 6 years, and my role in this webinar will be to present the results of our analysis, and then Kent will talk about the metrics that drove the results. Kent?
Thank you, Will. I'd like to welcome everybody here today. Right now we have approximately 50 food bankers and a few other industry-affiliated folks listening in. I began in fundraising. I fell into fundraising, beginning with Muscular Dystrophy Association doing special events. And when I realized that I needed something more than weekends and evenings of a steady diet, I learned direct mail working for a direct marketing agency out of Western New York. Then went to New York Easter Seal Society, managing their direct mail program for about 10 years. Then worked with a West Coast direct marketing agency, working with nonprofit organizations, and came to Robbins at the end of 1979 and have been here since. Throughout that tenure, I have worked exclusively in the food bank marketplace, working with our food bank clients. A little bit about Robbins. LW Robbins, for those of you that don't know, is a full-service fundraising direct marketing agency founded in 1971. We've been working with hunger-related causes for over 30 years, beginning with the Maryland Food Committee, who we worked with for almost a decade, and they transitioned out of business, and we moved into working with food banks. Robbins currently has 70 employees working in direct mail and another 10 in our digital division, ADCO, which we acquired in the early part of this year. We moved into the digital phase because we realized how important an integrated program is. And all of the data that you're going to see today is a combination of both direct mail and online giving. Right now we have a 7-person client services team completely dedicated to serving our food bank clients. And while we talk about a balanced approach, I'd also like to focus on, we like the KISS principle also. We try to keep it simple. We believe in measuring, and testing, and looking at the total picture. And part of that total picture does include online fundraising. Much of what the commercial world is seeing is being replicated in the nonprofit world, where the direct mail or catalogs are driving people to go online and either order their merchandise or make their gift. One of our food bank clients has experienced over this past year a 150% increase in just their online giving. And based upon that metric, since half of the funds generated online come in the month of December, they have the potential to make $200,000 to $400,000 just with online giving in the month of December. So please be aware that all the data we're showing you is direct response. It's not just direct mail. It focuses on online and direct mail. It does not contain any special events, grants, or planned giving income.
Just a quick note about the food bank benchmarking study that's the basis of this presentation today. We're going to present the aggregate results of the benchmarking study that we did at the end of October of this year for our clients' 2012 fiscal year ending in June. First, we'll look at how the donor populations in these food banks have moved and increased in revenue over time. Then we'll also look at several key donor attributes and how they reflect the strategies we've used over the last 5 or more years. And again, as Kent mentioned, these are all the gifts that you're seeing are a combination of direct mail and email gifts. The key point that we'll reinforce throughout our time together is that food banks can sustain growth through difficult economic times like the one we're emerging from now. Loyal donors, those that renew at highest rates and give the most revenue per donor, lead the way in near and long-term growth. And the best way to assure that you'll continue to grow your loyal donors segment is by acquiring high-quality new donors that give more and renew at high rates. What we think of as the right new donors for your fundraising program. Today we'll demonstrate that a successful fundraising program is determined by 3 key metrics: retention, coverage ratio, which is making sure that lapsed donor support is replaced in every year, and revenue per donor. First, we'll focus on the importance of effectively retaining strong percentages of donors in every segment of your donor file. The total annual gifts from food bank donors has grown in each of the years shown in this slide, spanning the recession years. Total annual gifts are a combination, just as a reminder, of the number of active donors in each year and the number of gifts per donor. The gains in this chart are from, first, the growth in the number of donors in each year, and second, increased gifts per donor in each year. Later in this presentation, we'll look more closely at gifts per donor to show the importance of cultivating more gifts per donor each year. We can say here that the goal for gifts per donor in each life cycle should look something like this, and we'll discuss these numbers again later in the webinar. For your multi-year donors, the best donors that you have, donors that have renewed at least 2+ years, 2.4 gifts per year. Second-year donors, which are new donors that have renewed into their first full year, 1.8 gifts per year. Reactivated donors, clearly the ones that were lapsed prior to this year and have reactivated in this year, that number is about 1.4 gifts per year. And new donors, donors that are in their first year of giving, 1.3 gifts per year. In this total revenue slide, you can see a big increase in donor giving in 2009, followed by a relatively small decrease in 2010, then growth in 2011 and 12. This reflects the positive file dynamics during the recession, plus careful growth planning through the challenges of each recession year. Part of the strategy for growth for our food bank clients was to remain strong, and we've reemphasized this throughout the presentation, to remain strong in new donor acquisition each year. We'll show a slide later on in the presentation that focuses more specifically on new donor acquisition. This slide shows how the total 0 to 12-month donor population for the food banks in this study has grown in each year. Many food banks experienced a strong year in 2009 as donor interest turned to people in need in their own communities. But we are aware that several food banks also experienced soft years in 2010 through 2012 as the recession continued and donor confidence dropped. For our clients, we made sure that they committed to growing their programs in each year by first acquiring quality new donors and reactivating lapsed donors, together amounting to populations of active donors that were greater than those that lapsed in that year. Secondly, we also made sure to maintain high retention rates of newer and multi-year donors. At this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Kent, and he'll discuss the metrics that resulted in growth. Kent?
Thanks. In donor retention, clearly we started with donor retention because that's the most important part, as far as we're concerned, in a successful direct marketing program. And the most important segment to focus on in donor retention are your multi-year donors, those who have given to you in the previous year and the current year. And the slide in front of you shows the multi-year donor retention rates that we've experienced in each of the last 5 years with this group of 10 clients. Our goal has always been 70%. Clearly, you can see that we've managed to achieve that for our clients. We're currently in the process of doing a file audit for a prospect, a food bank prospect, and their multi-year donor retention rate is 60%. And one of the things that we learned in talking with them was that they currently have little or no online fundraising companion program to complement their direct mail. And there are a couple of other weaknesses within their program, but that's probably one of the biggest ones. Their online income, their online efforts are minimal to nil, and they don't have anywhere near the success that these clients do. The second part of donor retention are the second-year donors, those who gave to you as new donors last year, and then the retention of those in subsequent years. And as you can see, over the last few years, as the recession has worn on, retention has dropped slightly. Our goal has consistently been mid-30s, 35% retention of those second-year donors, and we're still at that. But the economic realities of the day are impacting that. But clearly, we've been able to manage that. One of the reasons that we've been able to manage a 35% or better retention rate of newly acquired donors is that we strive to acquire high-quality donors. And when I say high-quality donors, I mean donors who have the propensity to give to you multiple times at higher levels. Later on in the presentation, we'll talk more about what those levels are. But the most important thing that we found is to rent direct mail responsive files as opposed to demographic or carrier route files, all of whom may have the capacity to give, but not necessarily the propensity to give. And so the strength of a strong retention rate for newly acquired donors is to acquire high-quality donors. Now, what do I mean by high-quality donors? This chart shows retention rates by amount of cumulative giving in the first year. And so you can see the donors who give to you at under $5 only have a retention rate of 16%. Moving up in the next group to 24%. And as you can see, even at $25 to $34, it's roughly 31%. The biggest jump of a meaningful sized segment occurs between that 25 to 34 and 35 to 49 average cumulative giving. And it's almost a 9% increase in that jump. There are bigger jumps, look at the 75 to 99 jump, but the quantity of names who give to you at that level are not that great. But basically, we look at that sweet spot of who we want to acquire at $35 and above. And again, the most important part of that is the rental and mailing of non-donors from direct mail responsive files. The emphasis should always be on the propensity of the prospect to give, not their capacity to give. In summary, retention rates, goals for multi-year donors should be 70% and second-year donors 35% or better. Now, we all know that we also mail lapsed donors. We don't factor them into this segment, though. We're looking at them in the coverage ratio segment, which is where we're headed next. The coverage ratio is the ability of a direct response program to replace the lost support of lapsed donors every year. Now, the biggest part of that is the acquisition of new donors. But the most overlooked part of the coverage ratio is the reactivation of the lapsed donors who haven't given to you in the last 13 to 60 months, and the expired donors who haven't given to you in 61 months or greater. The combined total of donors added to your current donor file in any fiscal year of newly acquired and reactivated lapsed form the top part of the equation, the bottom part being the number of donors who lapsed, who gave to you the prior year and didn't give to you this year. And so if you look at this as a mathematical equation, it's simply the number of new donors acquired plus the number of donors, of lapsed donors reactivated, divided by the number of lapsed donors from the prior year. Our goal is always to have that result be 1.0 or better. So the first part of the equation, looking at the number of new donors. So we talked about growth of the donor file. And these are the numbers of new donors acquired for these 10 clients over the last 5 years. And as you can see, at the beginning of the recession, there was a tremendous outpouring of support from newly acquired donors, jumping from 43,000 to 57,000. As the recession wore on, new donors were harder to acquire. We've all read the articles, and this is proof positive that as the recession wore on, donors became more discriminating and were less likely to take on new causes, even causes as important as feeding hungry people. So to offset that, we looked at lapsed reactivation. And as you can see, over that same 5-year time period, the number of lapsed donors who reactivated grew from 18,000 to 33,000. And again, I want to emphasize that lapsed donor reactivation encompasses anybody who hasn't given in the last 13 to 60 months in a lapsed capacity. And for this demonstration, for this slide, we're including the expired folks also, those that have not given in the last 61 months or more. But those two components added together are what we look at for replacing those that lapsed. And when mailing lapsed donors or expired donors, we've found that we can go back to certain segments and through modeling efforts, 10 to 15 years worth of lapsing and still have a cost-effective return on investment for reactivating those deeply lapsed or expired donors. Adding together the newly acquired and the reactivated lapsed is one of the metrics that we feel is very important in a successful direct marketing program. And as you can see here, 2008, the combined total of those was 62,000, and then the next 3 years, 81 or 80,000, and bouncing back now in 2012, fiscal year ending June 30th, of 85,000. So you can see that there's a constant growth of the program. And over that 5-year time period, it actually results in a 38.6, almost 37% increase in donors being added or re-added back into the program. Now, how does that look in the overall equation? Well, looking at the lapsed donor reactivation, those who haven't given in the last 13 to 60 months, on an annualized basis, we're looking at roughly a 20% of those being reactivated. Even on the expired folks, roughly 6%. Both of them much better than any metrics you'll get out of newly acquired. And when you add all those figures together, you get your coverage ratio. Now, I have to point out that on this slide, we actually removed one of the food bank's results from this entire coverage ratio model that you see in front of you for the simple purpose that only in 2007 did they begin an aggressive direct marketing program. And if we were to have included their numbers, the numbers of new would have blown this chart apart, showing something like a 1.8 in the earlier years and then dropping down to about a 1.2 in 2012. So in order to focus on established programs, which is the clients we're talking about here, you can see that in each of those years, the coverage ratio was 1.0 or better, and our goal would hopefully be a 1.1. Again, coverage ratio, think about new plus reactivated, lapsed, and expired divided by the number who lapsed. Now, at the end of the session, we'll recap the numbers and have them on the final slide. And for both numbers of gifts per donor for each of the segments we've talked about, and for the coverage ratio, those are pretty firm numbers that you should be trying to achieve or surpass. Revenue per donor is a little more subjective in that it depends upon your geographic area, the economics of your geographic area, the age of your direct marketing program, the maturity of that program, at what level those donors came in, because donors typically are most comfortable and most times will give in the range of where they last gave. So if you start them low, they're going to stay low. If you start them higher, they're going to be higher. So revenue per donor is, instead of looking at these numbers as, well, this is where I should strive to be, we'll show you where these organizations are and give you some type of benchmark upon which you should then track your own program. Under the revenue end of it, we're looking at 3 categories: gifts per donor, which Will spoke of a little bit earlier, average gift amount, and the upgrade-downgrade comparison. In the gifts per donor segment, Will earlier mentioned multi-year donors giving at 2.4 gifts per year, second-year donors giving at 1.8, and new donors giving at 1.3. The other one was the reactivated giving at 1.4. Overall program, you'd be looking at a 1.8 if you grouped everybody together. And as you can see, this is a year-by-year assessment of what's happened with both the multi-year gifts per donor, the second-year gifts per donor, and the new donors gifts per donor, each year achieving the goals we set forth. Average gift is, as I said earlier, a bit more subjective. It depends upon a lot of variables unique to your particular area. The other thing I'd like to point out about this chart is that it reflects all gifts given through online and direct mail, white mail, newsletters, regardless of the size of the gift. And so you can see that, the average gift per new donor was in the 70s, the same thing with the second-year gifts, and the multi-year donors were giving at about 95. But oftentimes, it's important to remove those higher dollar donors to get a better look at what your average gift is for these segments when you knock out the donors who gave $1,000 or more. And this next chart shows you what that looks like, average gift by life point in a donor's life within your donor file for all gifts by under $1,000. And as you can see, new donors came in with these clients at a $47 average first-time gift. Those donors that came in at $47 in the second year gave $52. The folks that had come in earlier, lapsed and reactivated, came back at $60. And the multi-year donors at $63. The overall average, if you ganged all of them together along with the expired, you'd be looking at $56, almost $57 per donor. Down below, you'll see the ranges that created these numbers. And within newly acquired donors, you can see the low at $39.96. Not a bad average gift, but that means, there's a lot of them below that amount, and there's a lot above that amount. Interestingly enough, that particular client focuses on quantity of new donors instead of quality new donors. And when you look at the retention rates, as we earlier did, you end up actually in a losing proposition as opposed to if you would have acquired fewer, better quality donors. Interestingly enough, also, the client that has the highest average gift of newly acquired donors at $56, almost $57, has a more aggressive gift array in their acquisition package than most other food bank clients. And so they do get the higher average gift. They have a higher retention value, but they'll get fewer of them. Long term, we try to strive for something in the middle, and these other clients, the other 8, represent that middle ground, resulting in the new average gift of the average gift for newly acquired of $47. A lot of data on here, but you'll have a chance to take a look at all of this at the end, and this will all be up on our website following the presentation, so it'll be readily available for you in case you are looking at comparing your data with what we're finding across the board. Upgrade, downgrade, the last part of the metric. And as you can see here, second-year donors, upgrade, downgrade, almost 38% in the second-year upgrade versus 21% downgrade. Multi-year, you have 27, almost 28% upgrading versus 24.5% downgrading. And reactivated at 32% versus 22% upgrade to downgrade. Most of the upgrading, interestingly enough, occurs in the lower dollar segments. Number one, those ranges are smaller than the upper dollar segments, and so that has a lot to do with that. But generally speaking, we're finding 60% of the lower dollar donors under $50 will upgrade. One of our final slides today shows the growth of these combined 10 programs over a 5-year time period. So you can see in 2009, these 10 clients were generating almost $30 million, and in 2012, almost $36 million. The bulk in both years came from your multi-dollar donors, and in 2012 now, 50% of total funds generated are coming from the multi-year donors. Again, getting back to the thing we talked about at the very beginning of the presentation, 50% of your income comes from those multi-year donors. Retaining those multi-year donors is probably job number 1. New donors in both scenarios are the second largest. Slight drop-off, as we showed with earlier. Second-year donors, again, a slight drop-off. Reactivated, again, a slight drop-off. But those declines were offset by the lapsed and expired reactivated donors, which drove then a lot of the growth. In summary, we've got the 3 key metrics: retention, coverage ratio, and revenue per donor. For retention rates, strive for your multis to have a 70 plus and your second-year donors 35 plus. And even though we talked about reactivated under coverage ratio, these are the metrics that we've been finding that work for success. Coverage ratio, looking at the number of new donors acquired plus the number of lapsed and expired donors reactivated divided by the number lapsing. And the goal is to have it greater than 1.0. Our goal has typically been 1.1. And revenue per donor, we've talked earlier about the number of gifts per donor across the different platforms, but overall 1.8. The average gift, $88. But if you were to knock out those $1,000 plus people, the average gift would be $57. And on upgrading, we're typically looking at increasing or having upgrading be a metric 10% more than those downgrading. In conclusion, I think the other important thing to say in all of this is measure everything. Because by measuring it, you'll be able to address any deficiencies within your program specifically to that target audience, as opposed to making blanket statements about, oh, I'm up this much or I'm down this much, or it really is not a helpful piece of information in developing strategies for growth. So measure everything. Will and I want to thank you for investing this time today to learn about the metrics of increasing your revenue potential. If you have any questions, we have time to answer them now. You can fill those in on the chat box and send them in to us. And if you don't have any questions, well, I expect to thank you for being part of this webinar.
We'd like to open up the floor for questions right now. If anyone has any questions, they can ask them, or they can submit them over the chat box, however it works.
First question, how do the online and DM portions work together?
Would you repeat that?
How do the online and direct mail portions work together?
Well, that's a great question. Typically speaking, you've got your direct mail file, and most clients do not have an integrated file where all the information is combined together. But there are those donors who are both direct mail responsive and online responsive. And we know that direct mail donors give smaller gifts more frequently, and online donors give larger gifts less frequently. But sum total, they both give about the same on an annualized basis individually. Donors who give to both online and direct mail give twice as much or more than either of those siloed donors. So how do they work together? Clearly, if you've got an integrated database where it's all together, you would send the companion emails for each and every direct mail appeal, plus year-end appeals. As I mentioned earlier, to your email file. As I mentioned earlier, we have one client that, based upon the amount of income that they've generated year to date, and we know that in the month of December, 50% of the online giving comes in, by aggressively conducting year-end appeals and companion e-blasts with their direct mail appeals, they could raise hundreds of thousands of dollars in the month of December just online. So I hope I've answered your question on that. If not, rephrase it, or let's talk later on.
Kent, we got another one who's asking specifically about the definition of lapsed and expired donors.
Sure. Where we've distinguished the difference between lapsed and expired, lapsed are those donors who have not given to you in the last 13 to 60 months. Expired are greater than 61 months and greater, so that's greater than 5 years. For some of the conversation here, when we didn't talk about expired, we were just talking about lapsed. That would be everybody who hasn't given to you in 13 months or greater.
Another question for you. You talked a bit during your presentation about the propensity versus the capacity to give.
Great question.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So you've got a high income zip code, a prestige zip code, where everybody lives in $1 million houses and they are pulling down $250 or more a year. They're the people that the president wants to increase taxes on right now. They have the capacity to give to you, but if they don't have a history of direct response, the chances are they're not going to respond to you. So they might look great on paper, but their activity is such that it's not going to be in your best interest to mail to them. The best way of determining the propensity to give is to communicate with people who are already accustomed to responding in the method that you've encouraged them to respond, i.e. direct mail or online. And it's very important to, send the same types of messaging to each of those unique files. If you're like most people and have separate files, an online file and a direct mail file, it's very important to send the same messaging both online and offline to your audiences, recognizing there's going to be some overlap and there are going to be some unique characteristics.
Another question for you. What were the geographic considerations for this study? Did they vary across the country? Or there?
Yeah. There were significant differences. Most of them were in large metropolitan areas. However, 2 of the 10 were in more rural areas. One of the lower average gifts that you saw in the range, with the exception of newly acquired, where I said that they're going after quantity, not quality, were rural areas. Those 2 were, the lower ones were rural areas. The higher ones were the more metropolitan areas. So there was some significant difference, and they ran from north to south and from the East Coast to the Rockies. So we didn't have any on the West Coast, but the vast majority of the country was included in those 10 food banks. Metrics on monthly giving programs we work with. Okay. So we did not specifically look at the metrics of monthly giving programs. This assessment would have lumped all of those monthly givers that are part of each of these food bank programs as part of the retention, which would have bumped up the retention, but it would also work under the average gift amount, which typically would have driven down the average gift amount. For the most part, most of the food banks do not have not yet developed aggressive monthly giving programs to such a quantity that it would make a significant difference in the results. However, it is, as is the online component, an increasingly important area that we need to focus on, but it was not broken out in this study.
Kent, can you talk a bit about the list sources for acquisition programs that you were talking to
Sure,
about earlier?
Sure. So list sources for there are a number of them. I'm not even going to talk about the bad. What I will say is there are several better list types to focus on. One is donors to other nonprofit organizations, by far and away the best one. Another that is almost as good are modeled files, either based upon a model of your file or as part of a collaborative, of which there are a number of modelers out there now that run them. They both work on direct responsiveness of your donor file. Third group would be direct mail sold magazine subscribers, and a fourth would be high-end catalog purchasers. The one thing all of these files have in common is they are proven direct mail responsive. Those would be the files that you'd want to focus on as far as obtaining those higher quality acquisition lists.
In the group of food banks and in your client base that we are focusing on here, are you seeing that they use matched contributions from employers, and how does that work?
Somebody must have just been reading our mind. We one of the things that we've done since the acquisition of ADSEO is we've developed a matching gifts program, and we have, I think prior to us getting into it, there might have been 5 or 6 food banks throughout the country who subscribe to a matching gifts program that when donors make their gift through their email address, we can identify whether or not they are they work for an employer who matches their gifts to food banks. With the addition of ADSEO, we've already recruited and are now have active another half dozen food banks who are participating in this program. And so essentially what it does is any online gifts that you get, the people put in their email address. And most people now do their holiday shopping, they do a lot of their giving at their workplace, which has the workplace email address. And this database matches up those email addresses and will identify those email addresses of employers who match gifts and automatically provide the donor with that form to be filled out or even populate it themselves and send it to them to be sent into their employer. For offline gifts, we can run an email append to the donor file of anybody that gives, and then run that up against this matching gifts database to again identify people who have given offline whose employers match gifts, and again get that matching gift submission form made to qualify for that matching gift from the employer. So it's a new area that we look very fondly upon.
Kent, in consideration of people's time, we've got about 10 minutes left or so. We've got two more questions for you.
Okay.
The first one is, how do we track the uptick in online versus direct mail giving versus any other exposure that our donors may have?
Well, that's a great question. And one of the preliminary reports that we produce prior to conducting the file audits, of which you got the condensed version of information, is a source code report. And that source code report breaks down giving information by just those types of characteristics, if they are so coded on your donor file. So that source code report would identify online giving versus direct mail giving versus white mail giving versus newsletter mailing, or any other distinction that you care to make, as long as it's on your database.
And our final question is, as we know, peak season fundraising is now. Can you give us any suggestions about what we should be thinking about for end of year?
Yeah. Mail, mail, mail. For year-end giving, obviously, this is the best time of the year to be contacting your donors and contacting them through the mail and with online. So a few months ago now, we ran an earlier webinar on year-end online fundraising. And if you have not yet, you should immediately plan on sending 3 or 4 online year-end gift requests to everybody that you've got an email address for. We know that 50% of the online giving comes in the month of December, and the vast majority of that in the last days of December. So it is not too late to develop and send a series of year-end requests to your donors online. Obviously, direct mail, it's a little late to start thinking about that now, but again, multiple contacts at this time of year through direct mail are a proven method of year-end fundraising, and hopefully everybody's been doing that, but definitely there is still time to implement that online effort. And for anybody that wants to do that and doesn't know how to do it, shoot me an email. We'll connect you with the right people to do that and get it up and running for you. And again, to put a value on that year-end email fundraising, think about how much money you generated last year, the entire year, and then look at roughly half of that coming in the month of December. I think your numbers will bear that out. And that's the minimum you could expect from doing it again this year. Is that it for the questions? Well, I'd like to thank each of you for participating today. We appreciate this opportunity to share this information with you. If you have any questions about any of this, give Will or I a shout, or it'll be up on our website. You can access it there if you just want the data, but if you want to talk more about your program and how it relates to all of this, please give us a call. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great day, and gosh, we stayed within an hour. Have a good day.
Thanks very much.
Bye now.